So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming in to our panel today. My name is John Rose. I'm a student recruitment officer here at Humber, and I also teach in the Bachelor of Public Relations program, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. So folks, first off, I would like to start out by just some thanks for people who've made this possible. So Tara Mazur, who is the acting curator for the L Space Gallery, Kate Viot, who is the collections assistant, and Sean Bois, who is the event coordinator, and also, although she's not here today, Ashley Watson, who is the curator, but who is currently on sabbatical doing her master's, is the person who was really one of the driving forces behind turning this idea into a series of panels, and so thanks to her in absentia as well. Just to give you a sense, this started out as a panel at Showcase, and then Ashley had the idea that we might turn it into a series. And so initially we had a discussion at Showcase about the role of creativity and the different definitions that each of us bring to our work of that idea of creativity. And then from there, we've had this series of panels now that's focusing more specifically on different areas. And so we looked at creativity and professional development. We've looked at creativity, collaboration, and communication. Today we're looking at creativity and leadership, and then in mid-March there will be the final of the panel series looking at space and design. So the idea has been to try and take a multifaceted look at this thing we call creativity. What is it? How does it inform our work? And how can we move forward in bringing more of that into the work that we do? So today, as I said, a few things that I want to note. One is that we are being recorded, as I mentioned. So be as animated and happy as possible in order to give everyone who watches this later the best possible experience. One of the things that's going to be coming out of this is a series of infographics. So one of the ideas that emerged from this is how do we create something that moves beyond simply the group of us who managed to be here today, and something that might be more generally useful. And so one of the things that the folks here in the gallery are going to be working on is creating an infographic, or a series of them coming out of these discussions, and so looking forward to seeing that. And then also, as you're leaving, on the back table there are feedback forms, and obviously one of the important things in putting an event like this on is just making sure that we're understanding what's working, what might we be able to improve, what can we do moving forward. So I would encourage you please on your way in to fill out a feedback form. So today, we're examining the relationship between creativity and leadership. Part of that is looking at what leaders can do to inspire and enable the creative efforts of others, but also in what ways is the practice of leadership inherently or potentially creative in and of itself. Our panelists will each give their perspective on the relationship between creativity and leadership, and then we're going to open it up to a discussion for all of us so that we can examine this a little further. So the one thing I will point out to our panelists, you'll note that as soon as the mic is anywhere not near my face, it doesn't pick anything up. So you do need to hold it fairly close to your face. So we're going to start with Dylan, and then we'll just work this way. So our first panelist, Dylan Rudder, Dylan Smooth Like Butter Rudder, is currently in his last semester in the Business Management and Financial Services program. Elected in as HSF Vice President of Student Life back in March 2014, he has been able to focus on enriching the student experience through creative events, marketing strategies, and advocating on behalf of the student body in regard to student fees. With a strong background and interest in finance and sales, Dylan has set out to be an entrepreneur you should look for. So, Dylan?
Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you guys here. The first step, I guess, for me, letting you guys know why it's important to be a leader and how being creative is important. You being here is that first step in seeking knowledge and seeking guidance from other people. For me, I had someone to influence me and really open my eyes to the fact that learning new things is why people are creating new things. When you don't want to learn anything and your mind is closed to learning stuff, that's when you stay stagnant and things don't grow. So for me as a leader on campus, I don't think it was necessarily a set formula to get to where I am. Everyone's a leader in their own eyes, and there's different ways of showing that. So being creative is a different thing though. So as a leader, wanting to create something as well, it sort of goes hand in hand. So let's say for clubs, getting involved for me and getting the students involved, you have to see the true value and realize why you're doing what you're doing. I often ask myself and other people, if you had, let's say you knew you had 5 years left to live, what would you be doing right now? And really finding the purpose of your life and what you want to get out of it. And once you find that, everything makes sense. So I think it was about 2 years ago for me, someone challenged me and asked me, if you had 5 years to live, what would you do? How would you be living your life? And that really sparked like everything that's been happening within the last year and a half for myself. So just finding your purpose, and it changes your perspective on life and what you want to do. When you have that knowledge, you just start soaking things up like a sponge, because everything you see and everything you hear affects you. Before, I could have read a book about leadership, and I'm like, that's a cool book, I like it, it's cool. But now when I read it, it speaks to me. I really hear what I'm reading, and it stands out to me. So on campus as Vice President of Student Life, I think because I found my purpose and why I do what I do, I sort of instill that with the students, and I really show them the value in what they're doing and how they can get stuff out of events or joining a club, volunteering, anything on campus in regards to that. So for me, when I tell the students to go into an event, I try to pitch it in a way where I understand that they will find the value in it for themselves. And it's not for me. They can come to the event, it can be no one in the audience, and I'll still be there doing what I have to do. So seeing the core value for them and realizing why they're here and what they can get out of it is what I try to push for the clubs and anything on campus. So I plan events and clubs organize clubs on campus. And there's leaders in every single group. I understand that people might see me as, okay, you're the vice president, you are the leader, but I'm learning from everyone around me. And I think that's important as well. Even in any capacity that you're in, you're looking to learn from people in all aspects. So HSF has so many different opportunities, and I got involved by just coming to the events, trying to meet a person. Just, hi, what's your name? Mark? Perfect, nice to meet you, Mark. What do you do? And just gradually from there, just seeking knowledge, seeking things that you don't know what you don't know. And when it comes to innovation and being a leader, wanting to know more is very important, and understanding that nothing was possible until it actually happened. So thinking that in the back of your mind is very important. So for me on campus, for the students, I think letting them know that coming to these events and joining the clubs and anything volunteering is for them, and realizing why they're doing it and how it can help them. So for me, small changes helped me get to where I am, and it's simply just wanting to meet people. I was very shy. I was very quiet, I was to myself, and it took a student coming up to me who was shy herself. She was shaking, and she just said, hi, how you doing? Can I talk to you for a second? I was like, why is she shaking? This is very odd. And she's like, listen, this is a New Year's resolution for me. I just want to step out of my comfort zone, and I want to try something, and one day be the leader I want to be. And I want to inspire my brothers and my sisters and my cousins and so forth. And she had a purpose, and I sat there and I was just like, that's very cool. Like, I wish I had a purpose. And she asked me that question, if you had 5 years, what would you do? And we talked about so many different things. And at the end of it, she said, you know what, in the next 2 years, you should run for vice president here. I was like, what? Why would I do that? I don't know anybody, I don't know anything, I'm not a leader. And just small steps gradually has got me where I am now. And that's really what it's going to take for everybody. So I think you guys here, you guys are our leaders as well. And not following anyone else and just coming here and seek knowledge. So good for you guys.
So our next panelist is Wanda Buote. Wanda is the principal of Lakeshore Campus at Humber and is the elected administrative representative on the Board of Governors. Over her 25-plus year career at the college and prior to her role as principal, she's held a variety of roles in the business school, including positions such as Associate Dean, Director of Partnerships Programs, Director of Professional and Continuing Education, Business Manager, as well as taking a secondment as the Director of International for the college. Wanda holds an MBA from Royal Roads and has also previously taught human resources to Humber's diploma level students.
Thanks, John. Thank you for having me today. I was kind of excited being the only woman on the panel. So when I approached this topic, I was thinking, okay, what is creative leadership? What do people really think about that? Is it, big thinking, new ideas? And I think that's a part of it. And so when I was reflecting, I'm thinking new ideas come from really hard work. It's not easy, and there's not a lot of new ideas. And really, creativity comes from teamwork, and I think it's about building, taking the time and building a really great team so that you can come together and have creative solutions to problems. And I also think that, that it's just the beginning of the process. Once you get the idea or the solution, then there's the whole execution stage of your idea. So being a leader of many different teams over my career, one of the things that I can tell you is that there's so many different people coming to the table, the way they approach things, their context, their education. And so as a leader, you need to figure out how to make that best work. And so the focus of my idea was really around, you know, ensuring that you're creating teams or environments where these teams can perform. And then really a part of that is defining what the problem is so that everyone has a clear goal to move forward. But it's also about creating that positive environment so that people understand that their ideas are accepted and that they're valued in the group, and so that they will contribute to the group, because you're going to get the best ideas when people are valued and their ideas, maybe you as a leader, you can say, okay, that's a good idea, now let's add to that. So the best ideas are where a leader can say, let the idea evolve and move forward. And it's also about building the collaboration in the group, but I also think it's important to have conflict, or making sure that the group understands that you can have varied opinions and the conflict is acceptable in that group, because that's, again, going to get you that better idea. So as a creative leader, you need to manage that. And I also think the best creative leaders are the ones that recognize the needs of the groups and kind of facilitate those conversations to come up with the best solution. I also think it's very important to encourage risk-taking and making sure that the group knows, hey, we can try something, and then you're not going to be punished by that. And it's also important for me as a leader to support my group, so when things do derail, that I'm there to support them, and also to be thinking forward to encourage them to have strategies or some kind of flags, so that when we are derailing, that we can bring it back on track. And I think the best creative leaders that I've worked with, not necessarily from my perspective, but from others that I follow, that they take the time to really step back from the situation and allow the group to kind of develop a deeper understanding of what they're trying to resolve. And sometimes there's these eureka moments after, when you've had some time to think about it, and then you regroup to really solve that problem. And then I was just thinking in general about some of the things that I think creative leaders have, and it really is around, you know, that passion, that ability to check in with others. I think creative leaders, they're more apt to check in with others and try to test out what problem they're trying to solve before they jump into it. And I think that they're passionate, okay, where are my areas? Passionate, sensitive to the needs of the group, and they really kind of inspire others because they have that passion and they want to jointly move together to solve the problem. So I think that really fostering those environments where people can be the best that they can be is really how you can get best decisions made and move an organization forward. And I think Chris has done a really good job with some of the committees that he's implemented recently. So that's my little bit on leadership.
Next panelist is Chris Whitaker. Dr. Chris Whitaker is President and CEO of Humber College Institute of Technology and Advanced Learning. Chris joined the college in July 2012 and is the fourth president in the college's history. He has worked in the Ontario post-secondary sector for 25 years and is passionate about student success and the role of colleges in providing access and pathways to post-secondary education opportunities. Dr. Whitaker's education includes a PhD from the University of Toronto, Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, an MA from York University, and a BA from Queen's University.
Thanks, John. And welcome, everybody. It's great to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come and sit on this panel and today. And I particularly like it for a number of reasons. One, it's focused on leadership, and it's focused on creativity, the obvious reasons. And I am a student and a practitioner of leadership, so I've got many observations, and we can really scratch the surface in 5 minutes or an hour. But I also like the fact that, as you mentioned, I didn't know this started in the Innovation Showcase with a workshop, and so many great ideas come out of those types of conferences, but rarely do we actually follow up on them and deliver. So this is fabulous, so congratulations. We've heard a lot of great comments from Dylan and Wanda already, and I concur completely with their observations and everything they've said, particularly with Wanda because she is on the board of governors, so she's kind of like my boss, so I always have to. And so I think we all take a slightly different approach because this is a broad topic and you can define it in different ways. But in thinking about creativity, I can share some comments from my perspective in terms of my experience with leadership and some of the things that we're trying to achieve here at Humber and build on some of the wonderful things that we already have here at Humber. Creativity, to me, I think creativity is a fundamental success factor to the success of any organization. So first and foremost, if you don't have creativity, you have stagnation, your organization is not going to go anywhere. And in this environment of rapid change, of complexity, of uncertainty, of ambiguity, and if everybody doesn't think, if anybody thinks we don't live in an environment like that, then they're probably fooling themselves. And it is about adapting to change. So change is happening all the time, and unless we encourage creativity and find a way to harness that creativity for the sake of continuous improvement, because nothing stays the same, in order to address the needs, in the case of the college, to continue to address the needs of our students, for continuous improvement, for innovation, if we don't harness, foster that creativity, then we do so at our own peril. So, I mean, that's my observation right off the bat. In an organization like this, a post-secondary education institution, obviously it's fundamentally important. Not only is our environment changing, but the needs of our learners, of our students, are changing rapidly all the time. And in many respects, I think we need to be in the business as an institution and as faculty and as educators of trying to keep up with our students. And you know, change is something that some people embrace reluctantly. Some people love change, some people thrive on it, some people go there because your comfort zone is always what you know. And I think it's something which is learned over time, how to actually embrace change and look forward to change and how to adapt to change. But I think it takes a certain set of skills as individuals working in an environment of change, and it takes a certain set of competencies as an institution where you foster that environment where people are comfortable with change. And I think you know, that's something that's often talked about. There's a lot of buzzwords, we can throw nice words about change and what we need to do to adapt, but it's another thing to actually be able to practice that, both as people working in the institution and as an institution itself. Because as I said, there's nothing like settling back into your comfort zone and just doing what you know. There's a certain comfort with that. It's like your old sweater, you know it's there, you know what it feels like, and you can put it on whenever you want. It's a different story when you have to get rid of it. It's all kinds of metaphors that we could be using. And so, you know, change is a constant, and I think one of the things that's important from my perspective is in order to create an environment where people can embrace creativity, people have to be comfortable in that environment. Like, that sounds so obvious, but if you think about different workplaces, different organizations, even students sitting in a classroom, you can't learn unless you're comfortable in that environment. You can't learn and you can't be an effective employee unless you're comfortable in your workplace, unless there's a sense of trust between the faculty and the student, between the employer and the employee. You need to create an environment where people are comfortable. And what that means is if people are comfortable, then they're not afraid to do some of the things that Wanda's talked about. They're not afraid to take risks. They're not afraid to ask questions. They're not afraid to do things differently. They're not afraid to experiment, whether it's as a student on a project, whether it's a faculty member delivering a new method of teaching or engaging students, or a new method of assessment with students, or designing projects with students, whatever it is. They're not afraid to do that. And what we need to do is create an environment where we demonstrate as an organization and as people within the organization that is of value to the organization, because it's a benefit to us as individuals and it's a benefit to our students. So we need to have that environment of trust. We need to have an environment where people feel supported and they do not fear change, or they don't fear trying things new, and they're not afraid of failure. I think we've talked about that as well, because we learn through trial and error, we learn through making mistakes. And so in a large organization like this, it is difficult to, to get that word out and to make sure that everybody is feeling supported and everybody's behaving the same way to work towards those common goals. But I think it's a value that we all need to strive for. And I am getting waved at, so I think I'll stop there and we'll have an opportunity to comment some more. Thanks.
And our final panelist today is Steve Bellamy. Steve is the Associate Dean for Humber School of Creative and Performing Arts. He was previously a professor of music production in the music degree program at Humber, and before that held teaching and research positions at the Banff Center, McGill University, and the University of Hartford. He's also a music producer and entrepreneur, and is the founder and president of Addo Records, an award-winning jazz and music label.
Thanks. I should have sat there. I'm just going to pick up on all of the great things that have already been said, but really, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, the idea of organizations being complex and ever-changing is the state we're in, but I would add that it's the permanent state. I mean, there's no real end in sight to large organizations being complex and ever-changing, and that is just what a large organization is. And with that, you have a great number of stakeholders, and you have a great number of interests. And I think the creative leader is skilled at being aware of those interests, and as other panelists have already said, having a thirst for the knowledge of what's going on in every corner of your organization, and knowing what all of those interests are, but at the same time, cultivating that sense of the interests of the organization as a whole, and being able to be creative in their problem solving, in their driving of innovation, and so on, in such a way that it meets a varied set of interests and also helps the institution on its main mission and goals. In doing that, as Chris mentioned, it's about environment creation, and as Wanda mentioned as well, it's about environment creation. And I think there are two, you have to think of that both physically and culturally. So the cultural environment of safety and so on that Chris was talking about is so critical, and the physical environments for creativity. What environments foster creativity? And there's a lot of work that's been done on this. I mean, the thing about, hopefully the discussion will get a little more into what we're talking about when we talk about creativity, because that's a big thing, but you know, creativity is not some magic thing that people can sometimes be intimidated by. It's knowable. You do have people that have achieved greatness and are masters in creativity, but really creative thinking, creative problem solving, these are knowable. We can do them, and a great leader can instill them and motivate people to do that in that organization as it moves towards those common goals. And in order to do that, you create those environments that foster it. And on the physical side, we know that it's environments where people at work get to interact with one another off task. So not your typical environments of the classroom and the boardroom and everything else, but social spaces. Spaces like this one. These are where ideas are born in a physical sense. And then in the mental and cultural sense, there are environments of, you know, the safety and security people feel and the motivation they feel to bring ideas forward, because good ideas should be rewarded whether they're acted upon or not. You know, I was reading about one institution that gives an award for what do you call it when someone tries really hard but it doesn't work out, like a bold effort award or something, but where there's a nice try. Nice try. But it's true that really celebrating that culture of innovation and as has been said, risk-taking. I mean, that's so important. And I think where a lot of organizations miss out is that they, even if people in the organization feel this way and feel that we should have those things, actually operationalizing them and realizing them and being deliberate about creating those spaces and processes is the real challenge. You have to be deliberate about the way you interact with people and be deliberate about creating the spaces that people can thrive in, and be deliberate about the process that will let those great ideas rise to the top where they can be implemented. And so, you know, really just another way of saying some of the same things that have been said, but it's so critical that we have this now, and I believe it's the permanent state for leadership. I mean, organizations aren't getting smaller typically and less complex. So I'll leave it there, and we'll see where the conversation goes.
All right, thank you. We'll go Michaelis from here, so everybody's on equal footing. One of the things that immediately came up for me that I'm curious to hear comment from the panel and potentially the audience as well is the idea of execution. Particularly, Steve Jobs is famous for saying real artists ship, and I think that one of the things where leadership really intersects with creativity is that there can be an endless generation of ideas and discussions and all these sort of things, but there comes a point where decisions have to be made and you've got to ship. And so, curious to hear thoughts from any of you in terms of that definition. Like, a senior leader is often referred to as an executive, and so the executive in terms of the relationship between that and the execution of creative ideas into, that's the relationship between creative and innovative, right? That an innovation is a creative idea that's been taken into what was doing something. I'm just curious for any of you, or again from the audience, that idea of execution as essential to creativity within an organization like this, and the leader's role in that. So I throw that open for comment.
Get started. Oh yeah, there's no mic. Yeah. So yeah, it's a great question, because to the point about, you know, it's a complex environment. We want to engage everybody, and we come up with better solutions when we engage and consult. But the reality is, to your point, you do have to execute on things. We can't consult and collaborate forever. We do that, but there's points along the way where we have to execute on specific things. And no matter how collaborative you are as a leader, the reality of leadership in any organization, it's a mixture of authority and democracy. So it's not just democracy rules, because you would never get anything done if everybody just said, let's just talk about it. I mean, it's fabulous, and the best ideas do come out of a respect for diversity and listening to people and having the humility to understand that you don't know it all. But together, we know a ton of stuff that isn't even known yet. And I think that's a very powerful concept if we can actually embrace that. But the reality is we need to work together, but we also need to agree on alignment with our vision and our mission and what we want to do. We have goals that we have to execute on. And so we need to agree that, you know, there's time to talk, and then it's an iterative process, as I like to look at it, as we come to a conclusion or a recommendation on a path forward. So you consult, you collaborate, you bring in all the diversity of opinions, but then eventually there needs to be a recommendation, and hopefully there's and what I mean by iterative, to arrive at that final outcome where you're going to act or you're going to execute on a decision, is something where a recommendation will come from the group. It might go up to some other level in the organization or down, and there'll be some input provided. And then you work towards a couple of iterations of something, but towards a timeline whereby you can actually execute on the decision.
I definitely agree with this one. It's just like the GTA transit systems. In terms of 25 years, we are not even a single line built. In the 35, so all we do is borrow, and finally, because somebody will at least stop borrowing and trying to build something.
So it's interesting, because that I was going to pick up on what Chris said and what Wanda said earlier about inviting disagreement. And I think one of the things we've lost in these types of institutions, which they haven't lost at the city, is our zest for debate. We should really be looking for debate and promoting it, healthy debate. And I think that's something that's been lost a little bit in the educational culture over the last few decades, where there's this deliberate... Thank you. That's great. I'm glad you did. You know, there's this... There sometimes is a deliberate or even subconscious sense that we should just figure out how we can do this without having debate, and that usually won't result in the best outcome for the institutional mission or for the individual area mission. So it's interesting that the city kind of has the opposite problem. They're mired only in debate and can't get to any other state. That's funny.
And I was just going to add, it really is situational, because one of the things that I do as a principal, I do some work in the community. And so I'm in grassroots organizations where there are a lot more constraints and it is more difficult and there are a lot more barriers. So sometimes I'm not the leader of the group, but I'm certainly a participant and I can help try to direct, but with so many different opinions and going with the majority of what our vision is, sometimes you veer off and it's a little bit more difficult because you don't have the resources, and it's not like Humber can just pay for the things to happen. We are a community group and moving forward. So it is a little bit interesting in the fact that you have challenges that you can't overcome because of lack of resources, where in the institution you have a set defined resource base.
Oh, I'm just really curious, as a creative leader, and to your point, Wanda, how do you use your creative leadership skills to bring that board, that group around to helping them make a decision besides always talking about we have a deadline?
I think sometimes, in my experience, if the time goes on, then there's some frustration that builds up in the group, and it almost is like it self-corrects, because then we say, okay, this isn't working, we need to look at, okay, what is our vision, does it need to be changed, and what are our steps that we want to take so that we can see that we're moving forward, especially when you're doing something around advocacy. I mean, I sit on South Etobicoke's Transit Action Committee, and really, we're just an advocacy group, and so what are those kinds of steps? I also sit on the community garden group, so those are the kinds of challenges we face, and again, it's about regrouping and looking at how we're going to evolve as a committee, and do we have the right people on the committee to make things happen.
It seems to me that an underlying sort of idea that's coming up in some of these comments is that part of what a leader has to do is think about when to lead and when not to lead. Because Chris introduced the idea of, well, we've got goals institutionally and we've got to head toward those, and yet if there's no ability to wander, we probably don't come up with anything new. So again, from anyone, panel or audience, just curious if your comment on the idea of that leadership is not a constant level of authority or even engagement, that in fact there are times when the best thing a leader can do is to pull back and let things kind of happen. So I'm just, again, just curious to throw that out as a point of potential comment for anybody about that idea of leadership is sometimes best exercised through really not particularly guiding or directing things.
Just have a couple of points on that, where we have this thing in the, well, I want to relate it to music producing, but I think part of that is communication, where everyone understands whether you're working on a specific problem or whether you're talking about the organization as a whole, that there's a lot of communication around roles and understanding how and where decisions are made in the sort of arc of a project. And we have this saying in music producing when we're teaching young producers that if you're producing a record and you're in the recording studio, if everyone in that studio doesn't fully understand your role in this process, you're probably in the way. And that really sinks in. It's not that you have to go talking about yourself, but it's that people should really get it while you're there. And at the same time, of course, understanding their own role in the process in several ways. There's always an obvious side and a non-obvious side, but really how a leader is inserting themselves into any process. It's important that it has a strong communication element. People understand what everyone's doing and how the process unfolds.
And this brings up another interesting point relative to your work, Steve, which is that as a producer, something that might be different than some of the other things we're talking about is often in a creative situation, some of the people in the situation may not view themselves as creative. So one of the challenges as a leader may be simply to encourage people to recognize their own creative potential. As a producer, presumably everyone in the studio sees themselves as a creative individual, and so I'm wondering whether you see any connection or contrast between the experience of leading a creative process with people who view themselves as creative versus people who maybe don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this speaks to the multiple definitions of creativity. I think it's, I'm in a position where working with Joe Curtis, we lead creative people, and that's not necessarily being creative leaders. We hope we're creative leaders too, but leading creative people is also, is part of that, and is something in and of itself. I do think, though, just to address the multiple forms of creativity, I really like this Kaufman model that is really, it cuts it up into 4 types that are very easy to think of. You have mini creativity, which is kind of what we all experience on an everyday life, like, oh, a nice flower, and that makes me think of the sun. Here's what I'm going to wear today. I mean, we're creative in our own sort of personal ways. We have small creativity, which is kind of problem solving, basic problem solving. And sometimes the word creativity will get used for that, but really some of it is just putting 2 and 2 together. You have professional creativity, which is what we do in the arts. This is where people make a profession out of taking disparate sources of information and making something new out of them, which is kind of a horrible minimization of what the arts is. That's professional creativity, but then Kaufman says you have big C creativity. Now this is the stuff that transcends discipline. This is not about the art, this is not about business, but it's about all these things. And these are your Einsteins and your Van Goghs and your what everyone is aspiring to with creativity. And so usually when we're trying to say to everyone that everyone can be creative, it's that problem solving and big C aspiration that we can all work on. I personally believe that professional creativity can inform those other things. I think arts as a model for creativity is a handy thing, but that's separate. I think we can really, so when individuals do or don't see themselves as creative, I think it helps to kind of define it and say, what are you talking about here when it's creative? You don't have to be able to paint a picture to be able to contribute deeply to complex problem solving and come up with the next great sort of thing.
And that's a question I throw open to the audience, whether any of you have anything you want to share in terms of that have you had experiences in the course of your work where a light bulb about your own creativity has gone off in terms of, I think because often there is this sense that, well, if I'm not a painter, if I'm not a musician, I'm not creative. So just curious whether that has been an experience for any of you in terms of changing your definition of creativity and recognizing that perhaps you fall more so within that expanded definition than you might initially have thought. Because I'm conscious of wanting to tie this into the way that all of us in our work experience. So I just throw that at the audience whether there's anyone who's had that experience.
I know, I'm reminded when we talked about understanding, reminded of a quote I read many years ago about a translator who's translating a book into English, and came across this phrase, someone standing below someone else. And he worked on it, I finally thought maybe it meant understand. Understand it. And it worked for me. It worked for the meaning of the book at the time. I thought about that a lot. And standing below somebody, and it means like you're not really standing above them, looking down on them. So I think leadership, creative leadership is often leading from the middle, I think. Not like, dashing ahead of people, but, understanding them.
There's a really nice quote, something Chris said earlier reminded me of it, that, and I'm not going to remember who said it, but that a truly creative person has a teacher and a student simultaneously acting inside them.
So I'm grappling with the combination of creativity and leadership. So a lot of what we've been talking about is a good leader is someone who encourages creativity in others and is open to ideas and knows how to direct that. But is that the only part of being a creative leader? There must be something intrinsic in leadership that has its own creativity that doesn't have to do with encouraging creativity. Do you know what I mean?
So you're saying the leader themselves doing their work in a way that is creative in and of itself.
In being, like if you take it away from idea generation, and you were a leader in, I don't know, in sports, somewhere, like we're a bit tied to our environment, but I'm wondering about the kind of other characteristics of a creative leader. Like I had this vision when I first heard about the topic of, some leader who appears one day at work dressed in very odd clothing, and what would that say about their leadership, right? It's that, like, what else is there?
I thought about that too, and that's where I came up with that whole concept of, that person being a person who's able to generate a lot of ideas, but also to take from the group and let those ideas evolve, right? So seeing the connections and making the connections to come up with that more creative solution to the problem or idea.
I think that's a good point. I think the question you're posing, Cynthia, is a really good one. What's that other piece of creativity? Because, you know, it is all about fostering the right relationships. But I think for me, in my, you know, evolution throughout my career, probably the most creative thing I ever did as a leader was to acknowledge that I really don't know much more than anybody about any, you know, including how to run a college or people or anything else. And it's both and creative in the sense that you have to get, that gives people great confidence in the organization when they hear me say that. But I think it's an acknowledgement that we're all human, we all have something to contribute, and we all look at things differently. And to step back and say, I can actually trust the organization, understand that we're all in it together. I don't know everything, and I shouldn't be expected to know everything. But if I suspend my assumptions and agree that I've got much to learn, so it takes a certain amount of courage for everybody to say, I don't know everything, but I think there's some great ideas out there. And so if you start from that, you suspend your assumptions that you think you know everything, and even if you think you know something, you really don't know. So I think it comes with practice, being able to think and not just listen to people, but they really hear what they're saying, and to try to integrate. And here comes that creative skill, is one, acknowledging that you don't know it all, so you're liberating yourself to a certain extent, and now you have to rely on trying to take the best of what you're hearing from others to come up with a new solution, right? And so that's how we solve the problems of the future, not by doing what we always did, but by finding new ways of doing it. I think you can only do it if you're involved ultimately in that decision that you have to execute, by really listening and respecting the diversity of opinions and not just trying to enforce your own frame of reference on things. And that takes a lot of discipline, and it takes a lot of self-restraint sometimes, but you know, it's often, I think leaders are much better when they're listeners than talkers, because they're able to really listen between the lines, if you will, and hear what people are saying and try to integrate those things, and then repeat them back, and together we come up with better solutions. But I think it takes it takes discipline to be able to do that, and also, you know, for staff and to sort of behave in that way demonstrates to others that it's okay to be that way, and it liberates people that generally sometimes work in fear that they're not going to say or do the right thing. Like, that's a big thing in every organization. But if we say it's okay, we're human, we're all in it together, and then people are liberated and they're willing to talk up, they're to speak out, they're willing to come up with solutions and offer their ideas. And I think it's better as we work towards that ultimate outcome.
Both you and Dylan mentioned something that I think is important in the leadership quality, and that is that courage to be that, right? So the courage to walk up to a stranger and say, hello, that's leadership. The courage to say, I might not know this, that's leadership. It takes a lot of courage.
It was an interesting comment that you made, and I'll get to it in the back in a second, but you said, together we know things that aren't known yet, which I thought was a really interesting way of looking at it, because it's true, like collectively, the people in this room could create a piece of knowledge that doesn't yet exist based on the pieces that we have, which I think is sometimes the piece that we individually forget, that there are little pieces of a solution all over the place. I just thought that was interesting to your point, that in some ways it's about encouraging that coming together. There was a point in the back.
Hi, my name is Maria, and I brought my daughter today too.
Great.
But just in regards to the previous question, creativity to me is survival every day. Without it, I would die. As a graphic design graduate and social service worker graduate, the importance of creativity to me is like, how can all these creative aspects of my life have a positive impact on social change? But it boils down to me as a parent also raising a daughter, and every day I'm thinking, okay, what kind of life do I want? How do I want this to work for me? It's not just, oh, let's go find XYZ job. It's just, again, taking that step back. So to me, it's everything. And I think what's missing, perhaps with some younger generation, is that I think they're missing that. I mean, I grew up in a different generation. We didn't come home, we were separate till the lights came on and things like that. Whereas now there's a different set of circumstances, so the brain is just, I think, thinking differently. So I'd like to see how can we, integrate this aspect of creative thinking throughout our daily lives, instead of just having stuff automatically automatically input. You know, again, it's Mental Health Day, and I think of all the impact of everything, but just in a big perspective, like we are all creative beings. And how can we help strengthen individuals, especially children, you know, to be more creative thinkers so that by the time they get to high school and college, they're not having to relearn or learn all this stuff. You know, I think it's something that can be integrated. You know, like I know they have leadership camps and things like that, but to me it's just that's scratching the surface of the true potential that's really out there for kids and teens.
Yeah, well, if I can add, to me this is it's a central point in arts advocacy. I mean, this is, you know, that thing you're talking about, if I'm understanding you right, is it's a muscle that needs to be exercised, right? This creative thinking process, and this is why you take music lessons. This is taking, or learn to be a writer, or learn to be a painter. I mean, it's a real point of advocacy. You don't need to aspire to professionalism in those careers. I mean, this is why, in my opinion, everyone should take piano lessons. You know, China has figured it out. They have 25 million aspiring concert pianists. 25 million. These are people beyond high school. Everybody takes piano lessons because it helps you exercise that muscle. And so this is a component of the answer, I think, is that that's what the arts are there for. So I would encourage creative activity for people. And it's a slow burn. I mean, I think this is the hard sell in arts advocacy, is that it is a slow burn. It takes a while. You do this, you take the lessons, and over years you develop these creative thinking skills. It's not sort of go for a week-long course and now you can do complex problem solving. But that's at least 2 cents on it.
I'm curious, Dylan, in your role as a student leader, I'm curious to get your, just any sort of thoughts, because this is a very transitional point in people's lives, and there is, I think, an expectation coming in here that by the time you leave, there's been some development of exactly the sort that you're talking about here. So I'm just curious, from your perspective as a student leader, whether you have any thoughts about this idea of sort of helping young people develop perhaps a set of skills that they're not coming in here with. Because I mean, maybe we do it in the classroom, but there's this whole other life of the student that you're certainly involved in that goes on. So I'm just curious if you can hear that.
I think having an open mind is the first step, and wanting to learn more than you actually know. So I have friends that are interested in things that particularly I might not be naturally interested in, but drawing myself closer to those things. So going to, let's say, a poetry show, I don't write poetry, but I found I guess interest in it, and I learned different things from different places through that. So I encourage students to always go to any opportunities that come up. So if someone invites me to whatever it may be, I'll be there. I want to see what's happening there. And not because I'm interested, I'm just interested in the knowledge part of it. And from there, I just aspire people, I guess, around me. And now they're coming to all these things that I'm going to. They're learning new things, and they want to be, I guess, experts in everything that they're touching. So doing things that not necessarily you like, because you get stuck, I guess, in a box sometimes. Like I can just play sports and video games all day long, but I think picking up a book that has to do with nothing about sports is what interests me now, knowing that I didn't know about it before. So I guess getting creative, it stems from more than your natural instincts of what you're interested in. And just for students who are on campus, they'll say, okay, I don't want to go to an open mic, I have no talents. But there's so much they can gain from going to events like that. And I try to show them the value and like what are they going to do? Not necessarily what I want them to. It's a talent show. I'm looking for talent myself, right? I'm looking for talent people, but there's so many other things they can get from it. So that's what I try to show the people coming into the school, that every capacity that you're in, you can learn something from it, regardless of whether it's an interest of theirs or whether it's not. So.
You mentioned comfort zone earlier, and one of the things I'm thinking about as you're saying is that we tend to think of comfort zone as things we do, but part of what you seem to be saying is that it's also important to take yourself out of your intellectual comfort zone and introduce yourself to ideas that if you don't understand them, there's a certain discomfort in that. So it sounds like what you're saying is comfort zone is a much broader kind of idea than we tend to think of. Is that?
It is, yeah. I actually don't feel too comfortable doing the same things that I continuously do on a daily basis now. And this is happening, I guess, over the winter break, but I was like, yeah, I want to go to do this, I want to play pool. I'm like, no, I don't. I want to do stuff that I've never done before, and I feel comfortable doing that. That's what sort of like sparks my interest, and I see or hear things that I've never seen or done before. And I don't know what it takes to get there, but I'm excited of the fact that I'm there now, and I encourage people to just get out of that comfort zone, do things you don't like to do because you work for them.
It speaks to your idea of a muscle, I think, as well.
Well, it's exercising that, and I love that you used the word open to describe it. It reminded me of this interview with John Cleese, the great comedian, and he talks about, we all basically have two states. We're open or we're closed. We have moments where we're closed, and that's where we're on task. We're doing the thing, the blinders are on, and you're going. And then you're open, where you're, as you described, just curious, and you're receptive and inquisitive and all those things. And so his sort of message is, absolutely closed can be good and helpful sometimes, but whenever possible, be in your open state and just practice that, shifting back and forth, because it's important to do both. Just to say that sometimes the pressure to be open and receptive all the time can be difficult. It can be hard to feel like I've got to change what I'm used to, but that's exactly it. And John Cleese agrees.
I think one of the things that I heard you talking about is like how do you get kids to that place of being open and being willing to share and learn from other people. And I think that's one thing that I picked up through university. I actually personally, in my personal experience, I hated the educational part of university, but I loved the social aspect of it because I got to meet so many different people from so many different cities, little towns that I had never heard of. And it's just you get to experience people's lives through what they tell you, and it's like being open to that and being open to learning through their experiences and not necessarily having to go through everything yourself, and just being open to the fact that everyone's human and everyone goes through their experiences, but what we want to learn at the end of the day is what comes through these, and just being open to that, I guess. It's like putting people in social situations where they're more able and willing to learn from different people. Yeah.
An idea that seems to be emerges from the things that a number of different folks are saying here is that this idea of intersections, that creativity happens at the intersection. So if you've studied both SSW and you've taken graphic design, that's an interesting set of intersections. If you're talking to people who've come from a bunch of different places, that's a set of intersections. And so what I wonder about in terms of this idea of bringing it back to leadership again, one of the advantages of being higher up the pyramid is that sort of 10,000-foot view. And so curious to get comment on the idea of, is part of creative leadership actively looking for or encouraging others to look for intersections that may not immediately be obvious. If you're in that place where you see the organization from a bit sort of broader perspective, is a part of that looking for, well, how does A connect to B, or how do I encourage people to start looking for connections between A and B? Because it seems to me like that's a really important part of different things that many of you have said. So I open to anybody.
Well, the idea about intersections is a good one, but to your point about getting different perspectives on things, I fully embrace and encourage that. And one of our challenges as a large organization is to look for ways to bring in those different perspectives, to have, and as I always say, I can sit around in a meeting, and I've done this many times, sit around in a meeting with a bunch of executives, and we're talking about things that we know nothing about. Really. So, I mean, it can happen, believe it or not. Again, that gives you great confidence in the college. But, the idea that, I'm a firm believer that the people closest to the work, so that means whatever it is you're talking about, whatever level of work in the organization, the people closest to the work know best how to improve it. They have the best perspective on that. And so and going back to our other comments, it's really asking those people. So what should we do about this? And because I know where I want to go in terms of high-level strategic goals and priorities, but in order to really act on those and to find the best solution, I need to ask the people that are close to it. And then ask the people that their work touches in other areas of the organization as well. So it's connecting all the dots. So it's connecting the dots between the people that are doing the work that you think you may or may not know something about, and asking them what they think, and then connecting the dots between their perspective and whatever the issue is, the problem, connecting it with other areas in the organization that are also impacted, or you require their support to find that particular solution for the problem. So I think, but the hard part in the organization is to find mechanisms and structures and processes that can truly engage people at that level. Because it's all very nice in theory. It's another thing to actually execute. And so unless you have, first of all, you need everybody on board with that philosophy and that approach, and then you have to have mechanisms where people can actually provide you with that input that you're looking for. And that's very difficult, particularly in an environment like this where the nature of work, particularly faculty work, people are coming and going all the time, and it's hard to even find people, let alone get them in the same room. Although there's all different modes and means of communication, it is a challenge. Communication is always one of our biggest challenges to this specific issue that I'm talking about, but many other things.
And to take that one step further, even looking externally and what kind of impacts some of these things are happening, and making sure that stakeholder information comes so that we're moving in the right direction.
Employers, teachers,
Guidance counselors.
It seems like knowledge management, although it seems like a kind of technical thing, ends up being a pretty important part of this process, because as soon as there are more people who can fit in the room, it becomes about our ability to engage in some sort of mediated communication about knowledge.
Yeah.
And well, that's where you need the deliberate structure to schedule that debate, build a frame about how it's going to happen and how the solution will be pulled out. But it's.
I have a question which I think sort of relates to this, and I was thinking about it earlier, Steve, when you were talking about creative process. Certainly with my students, that idea of being open and exploring creativity also brings a certain amount of anxiety with it, and I think that's a pretty big theme in all of our classrooms these days. So I'm wondering how you balance that sort of creative process, exploration, openness, and even in things as a leader, which Chris was just referring to, letting go of I'm the expert, I know everything, I actually don't know anything. How do you manage that anxiety that totally comes up for the people that you're working with, or with students, in that process?
Well, in my case, a lot of times it's about, I think, talking people down from that self-inflicted pressure to do something brilliant that the world has never seen before. And sometimes creative can just mean doing something you haven't tried before. It doesn't have to be an invention, right? It can be something you haven't done. It can be, to Dylan's earlier point, putting yourself in an unfamiliar situation. Baby steps, I guess they call it. But really, that's part of it. I mean,
Just a point that might be interesting, there's a quote from Ira Glass, the NPR, who talks about when you're starting anything, that there's this distance between your abilities and your taste, and that gap is often what makes those initial creative efforts so painful in a sense, because our taste far outstrips our skills in those early moments.
Yeah, I show that to my students.
Oh, great. I love that.
I'm thinking about when you're in the classroom and sometimes your fears about exposing your lack of knowledge about something. Back to what Chris was saying, and again, the courage to be able to do that. So I was teaching book publishing, which changed every week. Well, especially in the first year or two that I was teaching it. It was when electronic, digital publishing, it changed every week. I couldn't possibly keep up. So I had to stand there and say, we're going to do this together. Because I can't do it myself. We have to do it together. I want you to come in with whatever you read, whatever you know, and we're gonna, if we need to, we're gonna throw away what we were gonna talk about on that day, and we're gonna talk about that. That was scary, because that isn't my lesson plan. That's scary, but it really worked.
That's creative leadership.
it is. For about a year, Cynthia would email me, look at what a student showed me today. It just kept happening and kept happening. It's true.
Well, it's interesting too, because what you're saying in part is there is this point at which authority and leadership can diverge depending on the context. And in fact, to try to hang on to authority may mean that you're in fact not engaging in very effective leadership if you're in. The greater the ambiguity, the less you can rely on authority, which is interesting because we always think of those things as being very entwined, and yet in some cases, and I think it goes to your point as well, sometimes like they don't know.
Yeah, and it's about, and Cynthia's point and the question about anxiety, they're all good ones, and it's a good example about teaching and teaching this course, because we all know, and I've done lots of teaching in my past as well, the person that learns the most in a classroom, in my mind, is the teacher. It's not the student. So it's taking that view and really believing it and acting on it, that no matter if you're in the classroom, whether it's a student, a teacher, a support staff, a manager, we're all teachers and we're all learners, which means we're teaching others, but we're all learning, and that's part of this concept of the learning organization. But we're all learning all the time, and that commitment to lifelong learning. And it's finding the balance between knowing something and telling people what you know, and having the courage to say, this is what I know, but this is also what I don't know. And having that courage to show what you know, because again, you know, my thing about telling people I don't know anything, you know, I can get away with it now in my career. We don't want to have our students going out to prospective employers saying, so tell me about what, you know, well, I really know nothing, but hire me, please. So we really don't want our students doing that. But the nice thing about the environment we have at the college and the applied nature of our education is we are giving them that. So people do leave here with specific, they are job ready, they have a specific skill that they can go out with. But this other piece about, you know, to the comment earlier about how do we teach creativity at different levels of the education system, we want to make sure we're creating lifelong learners so they have that curiosity, that adaptability, the questioning, and the right set of interpersonal skills, combining that with the technical skill which they can demonstrate they can actually do something and they know something. It's finding that right balance and how they communicate that, which will really help them in their careers and their lives. But I think that's important for our students. It's important for us. You know, that concept of we're all teachers and learners, and you got to be humble about that. So.
Dylan, again, I'm curious to get a student's perspective from, you know, that idea of when you're in the classroom. Credibility is important on the part of your, you know, whoever's sort of imparting the information, but that managing of process, which it sounds like what you're really talking about, how important is that from your perspective in terms of that the person leading the class be engaged in managing the process, regardless of any information they may be broadcasting? I'm just curious to get your feedback as a student.
Luckily, I've had pretty good professors. I'm in a class right now, it's an entrepreneurship course, and we're very open, similar to what you were saying, is letting the students bring material and learning from there and teaching each other. I think that's very important, especially when there's stuff happening currently around us in the world and in the news, and applying stuff like that to the classrooms is very important. When it's, I guess, a textbook that maybe 10 years old, it's harder for the students to relate to it, or feel like it's even relevant at the present moment. So in those atmospheres when you're learning as a student, I guess wanting to know more other than what's in the textbook is important as well, and relaying that message to the professors that we want to know more than what's happening here, but also what's happening in the real world, in the newspapers, and in the States or in Russia, wherever it may be. I think that's very important for people on both sides of the spectrum, for professors and students to want to learn more than just what the book is teaching us.
And here's a great example of where creative leadership is required in managing this changing role of professors in our classroom, this changing role of sort of sage of knowledge over to facilitator of learning and lifelong learning. And that's something that, you know, we have to be strategic about and sensitive about in terms of you're shifting the identity of this role necessarily, but it's actually an exciting one. It's easy to look at it and say, well, I'm a teacher and I'm not as valuable as I used to be because they have Google and stuff. And you can look at the downside, but it's actually, there's a bigger upside that we're asking our teachers to be leaders in a much bigger way now, because in order to be a successful facilitator of ongoing learning, they have to have a stronger understanding of the context within which their course sits and the larger, I mean, just even to put it simply, their program and the institution. It's more important than ever that they understand that bigger picture about what it is the students are learning and how it fits into all the skills they're doing. And once people embrace that, they soon are, I mean, that's great. They love that and don't want to go back to where they were just sort of a walking dictionary or encyclopedia or something, because that's much less interesting. So it's an exciting time, but managing those types of change is an example of the kind of thing we're talking about.
Sorry, just in the honor of creativity, I was just doing a hashtag called Creative Panel and putting it out on Twitter. So.
Are we trending yet?
Something else I'm curious to get feedback on, and this maybe even taking this idea of not being so sure a bit further. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters recently did an 8-part documentary on American music called Sonic Highways. And one of the final parts of it is he interviews Barack Obama, which is visually a very interesting juxtaposition when you see the two of them sitting in like one of the libraries in the Oval Office. And one of the things he said to Barack Obama was, what do you think the president can do to inspire young people to keep making new interesting music. And what immediately went through my head was, if the president wants young people to make new interesting music, he should tell them they're not allowed to. and I was thinking about my notes for this as that was going on, and what occurred to me was that we talk a lot about sort of paving a path and inspiring and empowering and all those sorts of things, but what I'm wondering is, do you ever find yourself, not in an artificial way, but do you ever find yourself as a leader needing to give people something to push against, needing to really make clear a constraint or a barrier and say, well, this is the thing that we need to get creative about? So do you ever find that sometimes creative leadership is about really focusing attention on something that isn't working in order to get people moving in the direction of trying to move that? I'm just curious to hear.
In my office, I could say yes because I don't have a large budget, so that's always a constraint for my staff. So we're always looking at making the most of the money that we have to support the campus. So yeah, so that can come. We can come up with some very creative things and fundraising in different ways.
And you find that sort of the focus on that constraint, the team begins to move or operate in a different way once that focus is there?
Sometimes, yeah, because we really sometimes have to look at, okay, what's more important and put weight against, okay, do we want to have a bus and how many people are we going to get in that bus, or are we going to approach it a different way to get better value for them? And so it just depends on what the situation is, for sure.
I think as well, I'd like to challenge friends, whoever it may be, and just tell them it's a bad idea. You know, I know it's a good idea. It's a terrible idea. No. Because they want that. You have to do it sometimes. They want you to believe what they believe, so they dig deep and say, okay, what about this? What about this now? They start changing their perspective. They're not looking at it as, okay, this is coming from me, but they try to, I guess, come from a different perspective and like, okay, what if I was a 70-year-old man? Would it work then? I'm like, okay, now you're thinking, your ears are moving, because they changed where they're sitting from. They're changing their seat now. And I tell them that too. I have a class, entrepreneurship class, and I tell them, okay, we're stuck here, we're not getting anywhere. Let's change our perspective and act like we are now 5-year-old kids, and we're going to play around how was product defined for us. And it changes everything. It changes the way they view any and everything. So this challenging people and saying, you know what, no, it's a bad idea. It might help them, and it has I've seen that happen before. So
that's cool.
I believe constraints really do make different thinking. Like it's an opportunity to think of better solutions.
Without them, there's no need to be creative. You know, that's what we're engaging with.
Well, and they often, I mean, you often read that artists thrive in difficult times, right? Because there is this, who's the fellow that writes the Richard Florida about the artists leading the neighborhoods and that sort of thing. Yeah, so it speaks to the same sort of thing.
Pretty great quote recently, and like you, I wish I could remember who it was. A maestro, I can't remember who, but saying that the great work comes out of hard work and not quite enough time. Other thoughts about creativity, leadership, or otherwise? Well, I'll put a question to the audience then. What is, for any of you, what is the most sort of interesting or unexpected thing that you take away from today's discussion? Because I think that in any of these sorts of situations is a really important thing for us to think about, is what are the key takeaways? Because I think they're not necessarily always obvious to the people who are up here discussing it. So I'm just curious to get feedback. Is there anything that you walk away from this discussion with that wasn't what you expected to get from this discussion? Anyone?
We're okay with the conflict.
Well, I think that's very good, the idea of constructive conflict. You know, I'm a non-conflictual person, so that's would be outside my comfort zone. So I might just go back and think, fight. I do, a couple of things. I do love this quote, creativity is intelligence having fun, because teaching, you know, how cool is that to think that that's not just a sideline that you're doing. Another small anecdote, I was at an HR human resources conference. No, a trade show conference. We couldn't afford the conference. Went to the trade show, and we had a student who'd been.
That's a constraint.
A student who'd been to a lot of trade shows in another capacity, and she said the one, you know, and she said one in Texas was really, you know, very conservative, and the one in San Francisco was wonderful. And I said, well, how would we compare? I thought we'd be towards San Francisco. That'd be very cool. And she said, well, this is nice. But you're all doing the same thing. And we were all, you know, dressed professionally with our little booths, and we were giving out, you know, candy candies or giving some little swag out, and it just sort of opened my mind. And she said, well, in San Francisco, and I realized it's a different context, but just they'd be dressed differently. They'd do something that was really fun. You'd go in and you'd say, this is really fun. And I harken back to courage. I don't think I have the courage to dress up like a 19th century professor or whatever, but wouldn't that be creative? And how much courage do I have to just push the envelope a little bit? Which kind of opened up, like, that was a different paradigm for me. We don't all have to be saying, you know, the same thing and having the same brochure.
Other thoughts on that one?
Well, I have a bit of a funny story to share, which goes back to a very early thing that Wanda was talking about the safety in ideas. So my husband worked in idea generation and new product development at Procter & Gamble. And pretty different kind of, I mean, some of the same kind of work as me, but for, you know, toothpaste and all that kind of stuff. But he's full of ideas. And when he first met my father just thought he was kind of crazy. And he had too many ideas. And my father would always say, that doesn't work, and that's stupid. Like, my father is not a creative idea person. And he would actually say, that's stupid. And so one day, my husband said to my father, look, Phil. Now, my father was a taxi driver his whole life. And Dan said to my father, look, Phil, I want you to imagine a car where the engine is on the roof. And my father said, that's stupid. And Dan said, now come on, you have to think of one good thing about the engine on the roof. And I could see my father actually thinking in a way he probably never thought before. And he said, well, it would be easier to keep it clean. And I just thought, like, it was a breakthrough moment. Like, it was just an incredible moment that it was a stupid idea, right? But he had to come up with one good thing. And that idea of, you know, always thinking when you react to someone else's ideas, like, what's the one good thing about that idea? And, you know, back to the idea of making a safe place for people to have creative ideas.
I'm conscious of the fact that we're coming toward the end of our time, so wondering if perhaps just from the panelists, if you want to offer one final thought on today's subject, or whether it's recapping what you said or something you've learned or anything else, just to sort of close off for us.
He's looking at me, so. I guess I should start first. Something to take away, I would say, I think it's a point we've all touched on already, is just seeking knowledge from different sources. Different outlets, and it's not going to be easy, and it's going to be a scary process because you're stepping out of your comfort zone. And whether that's shaking someone's hand or reading a book that you know nothing of, it's just making that step of doing something you've never done before. And that's when you start to really learn and start developing. And there's no limits to that when you're always seeking knowledge. You might feel like, you know, this is not, I can't apply this, but you can find that one thing. I think that similar to what you were saying, you can find that one thing that you can apply to it. So take a chance. There's I guess sometimes you feel like there's routes in life you have to take. There's, okay, path A, B, and C, but you don't necessarily have to take either of them. You can just walk beside this path and do whatever you want. So I think that's a challenge that people see. They see these directions and ways to go. Even after graduation, my mom was like, yeah, you should go straight to the bank and get talent. I was like, why do that? Because it could be something else I can use the skills I gained from the program that I'm taking in financial services and apply it somewhere else. So it's just that open mind again. Not necessarily following the route that you see in front of you. So.
For me, I think it's just about approaching whatever you do, whether it's at home, at work, wherever. Really, like, look at whatever problem you have and think differently, collaborate, reach out, try to find different ways to approach things, and you'll probably have a better solution moving forward. Work collectively together.
I think I'd love to build on those themes that both Dylan and Wanda just said. And the theme of keeping an open mind. Again, it's so much easier said than done, because, you know, we all, from the time we're born, you know, we develop these mental models, and so we're all victims of the mental models, the lenses that we use to view the world, to view others, to view whatever it is. And it's very difficult to really, it's about discipline to get outside of, to get out of your own way, to get outside of your own head and try to suspend those mental models. And until we can do that, to realize what those mental models are, the lenses of the framework that give us the bias through which we see the world, suspend those things, and then we can appreciate the true diversity and the wealth of knowledge and respect the perspective of everybody in the organization. And if we're all able to think about that and work towards it, again, we can come together and develop these collaborative solutions to the many challenges that we face.
Just pick up on that and say that sometimes, or another way of saying that is you want to look for the non-obvious sometimes. And you have to take that obvious solution that jumps out at you, you might have to put it on pause for a second and say, am I going to leap towards that answer because it's the obvious one? And just let's go on pause. That's not enough of a reason to do something, but it's the obvious decision. So put that on pause, explore all of the information available to you, and something sort of better will probably emerge. And just to give you two anecdotes, very quick stories that I heard on, do you listen to that, is it Quark or Quark? Spark. So this is wonderful. There's a high school in Coachella in California that had an issue. It really serves 95% children of migrant workers. Most of them don't speak English. They have accessibility issues across the board. And through a process and a study, they figured one of the steps we can do is give these people more access to the internet. That's a huge barrier for them. And they lived in trailer communities that wasn't something they could do. A long story short, their solution ended up, when they pulled people from different parts of their organization together, the solution ended up being putting internet hubs on the school buses so that the students could access the internet to and from school. And further than that, they saved on parking because they decided to park the school buses in those neighborhoods permanently, so in various places. So they worked with the community, so the school buses themselves became this internet access for these people, and that's been transformative, which was an inspirational story. A second one that was very interesting, very simple app for phones to help. It's called, I'm not going to get the name of it right, but it's for people without sight.
Oh, yeah.
And it's called Be My Eyes, I think, is the app, Be My Eyes. And it basically allows people without sight to call in to the Be My Eyes folks with one click of a button. And the people that run that company have a roster of volunteers who've decided to be on the other end. And if I'm unsighted, I might need to just show the camera on my phone to something and get some random person's help telling me what that is. I need to check the expiry date on a milk carton or something. And if you're so inclined, you can sign up to be on this roster. And it's launched this kind of micro-volunteerism, which is allowing people who want to give but maybe don't feel they can sign up for something that's enormously time-consuming or something. It allows you to micro-volunteer on this seemingly obvious level in hindsight, but what a brilliant fix. And so I think anytime you see things like that, it's wonderful to try and back up and look at the lines that had to have been drawn and the connections that had to have been made to come to something so beautiful. So it's, yeah.
One of the things that I've been thinking about, this idea of organizational creativity has come up a few times, and it's occurred to me as hearing everybody talk that it seems to me that the intersection between personal and organizational creativity is leadership, that essentially it is leadership that turns many personal competencies into an organizational competency. And as such, it occurs to me that with this idea of leadership, that any of us who sees an opportunity to seize upon or create an intersection has the potential to be a creative leader in the organization simply by virtue of bringing two personal competencies together and creating the beginnings of an organizational one. So the thing that I carry away from all of this is I think that every one of us has that opportunity with hopefully this new lens that we have from this discussion to see those opportunities to create intersections and new connections and to have us collectively know something that is not yet known despite the fact that we have all the pieces individually. And so I hope that some little piece that comes out of this is perhaps that we all walk away with that lens as one of the lenses we now use in our work. So I would like to thank all of our panelists today, obviously, for coming in. Thank you very much. Folks in the gallery, thank you very much for making this possible. And finally, obviously, to all of you, because this would be pretty weird if you weren't here. So. and I think that what this gives every one of us is, you know, you throw a stone in the pond and those ripples move out. Well, every one of us represents a ripple, hopefully, that moves out from this discussion and begins to create other ones. And so I encourage you to do that. And again, I thank you very much for taking the time to be here today. I hope it's been helpful. And please do give us your feedback on your way up. It's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.